This is Jamie Hatfield with Legends Health, Wellness, and Performance. And today we have Orion Inskip, who is an attorney out of Seattle. He works at Gleam Law. And I have heard him speak at two different CBD conferences. The one conference was in San Jose and the other one was in Anaheim. And I hear that he's expected to come to Utah and speak at Utah Can and also in Boston. So he's kind of at the forefront for attorneys and the legalities around CBD and marijuana and overall cannabis. So welcome, Orion Inskip.
Hi, thank you, Jamie.
I'm just going to go right out of the gate and ask you, is CBD legal?
Well, as any good attorney would answer any question, the answer to that is always, it depends. Currently, under the legal landscape, there are two streams of possible legality. The first one comes from the CSA itself and has been around since the CSA was originally turned into law in 1971. So the CSA definition of marijuana includes or excludes certain parts of the plant, and those certain parts of the plant can't be grown within the United States, but can be imported from outside the United States. So if you wanted to import those parts of the plant into the US and those parts happen to have CBD in them, then yes, that would be a legal source of CBD. The second source is a little bit more or less well proven, which is from the Industrial Hemp Pilot Program. In 2014, Congress passed industrial hemp pilot programs, which allowed states to establish their own programs to grow, cultivate, process, and market being the important word here, industrial hemp. So under those programs, the whole plant can be processed in theory for CBD.
And my understanding with that is if it's less than 0.3%, then it's actually considered hemp, and hemp is legal if it falls under that 0.3%. Is that correct?
That's correct. So prior to the 2014 Farm Act, anytime we talked about hemp, we were really talking about a particular strain of cannabis that had been selectively bred for its rope purposes and fibrous purposes and those types of purposes. After the 2014 Farm Act, however, Congress defined industrial hemp as all parts of the plant Cannabis sativa L with a THC level of less than 0.3 per dry weight. So really it created a new definition for hemp that includes the whole plant and not just the CSA excluded parts of the plant.
Okay, my other question here, when you're saying mature stalks and seeds, because I know a lot of people are importing just stalks and seeds, what is the DEA's, kind of clarify that, what is the DEA's rule on that?
So the DEA's opinion, of course, the DEA isn't a science-based organization, so it's purely their opinion on this, and it's not law or regulatory in any way, shape, or form. But the DEA's opinion is that the parts of the plant that are excluded from the CSA definition, so the parts that you could legally import through the CSA exclusion, don't have cannabinoids, which would include THC and CBD. So they wouldn't, if they have either THC or CBD, the DEA, again, their opinion is that it must come from the other parts of the plant. Now, this has been tested specifically under HIA versus DEA number 2. That under that case, the court found that just the existence of THC within the CSA excluded parts of the plant did not make that part of the plant a controlled substance. So under that decision, which I think was 2006, you could then import hemp or the excluded parts of the plant from outside of the United States, even if there were small amounts or trace amounts of cannabinoids.
So let me understand this. When we're saying CSA, or when you're saying CSA, that really means the Controlled Substance Act. And with the Controlled Substance Act, currently, how is marijuana and how is CBD defined in the CSA's guidelines?
So marijuana, CBD is not defined. That well, and we'll get to that here in a second when we talk about Epidiolex, but under the original schema or the original definitions, CBD is not differentiated. We talk about marijuana, and again, they use marijuana with an H. So under the actual Controlled Substances Act, they define marijuana and then exclude the stems and the seeds that are incapable of germination, so the sterilized seeds. And those parts they excluded so that we could continue to import the parts of the plant that people consider to be the usable parts of the plant for hemp purposes. But there's no discussion or definition in the CSA that talks about THC content or CBD content or cannabinoids.
Okay, so what about for the DEA?
So the DEA came up with what they call the marijuana extract rule, Rule 7350, which what it did was it created what the DEA says was a way to track things that are extracted from marijuana, specifically cannabinoids extracted from marijuana. But many would say that their rule was an overreach, because rather than say that that it is extracts from marijuana, their definition expands that to say any extracts from the plant Cannabis sativa L, which would then recapture the part of or the industrial hemp that Congress removed from the CSA with the 2014 Farm Bill.
Okay, so with the 2014 Farm Bill, I know we have a 2018 Farm Bill that's supposedly coming up, because people right now are distributing and being covered from a legal standpoint under the 2014 Farm Bill. What do we foresee coming out of the 2018 Farm Bill?
So we're fairly certain that Mitch McConnell's hemp provisions in the 2018 Farm Bill will remain intact, and those will make it through. As of today, which is the 27th of September, that Farm Bill has been tabled, and it doesn't look like they're going to re-engage and pass that until after the election. So although they had the goal of having it passed before September 30th, they came out today and said that they will not pass it, or they're not going to do any action on it until after the election, which is too bad. There are a lot of programs within the Farm Act that rely on ongoing funding, and that funding now is going to be in question. However, for our purposes, the Industrial Hemp Pilot Program that was in the 2014 Farm Act doesn't have what we would call a sunset provision. So it's been codified in the law and will remain good law until the 2018 Farm Act. And in that Farm Act, what we'll do is what we'll see is those industrial hemp pilot programs will go away. And generally speaking, hemp will become an agricultural product. It will be under the purview then of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and will specifically be removed. So hemp being defined as any part of the plant Cannabis sativa L with less than 0.3 THC by dry weight will be removed from the Controlled Substances Act. Will actually be legislatively removed from the CSA. So that's a good thing, because that makes it so that the DEA's hands are pretty much off of it. That there will definitely be some questions out there and some gray areas about what that means as far as prescription drugs that are based on cannabis. But with the removal of hemp from the actual Controlled Substances Act, we at least have one of the questions answered with almost certainty. We'll have the most legal clarity we've had in the field in a long time.
So where does the FDA come into play? Because you just did mention the FDA and the Food Drug Administration and having Epidiolex just recently being approved as a drug. Does that mean that all CBD is now actually considered a drug?
So yes. So under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, and it's important to remember that the FDA also controls cosmetics, the FDA is charged with making sure that our food, our drugs, and our cosmetics are what they say they are. And on each one of those, there are different levels and different standards. So if something were a food supplement, like let's say turmeric is a food supplement, and you were going to put it into a pill and sell it, the FDA still has control over that, and any kinds of claims you make over that, the FDA is going to require you to verify as as a structure and function claim. But if you start to make claims that are actual medical claims, then what you're saying to the FDA is that what the product you're selling is a drug. So if you were to take even turmeric and say that it cured cancer, well, now you're saying that this is a drug and the FDA is going to require you to meet all the requirements of being approved as a drug. So when it comes to CBD, GW Pharmaceuticals did that. They went through the process for Epidiolex, and they did it for 2 diseases that are severe forms of epilepsy. And they finally got approval back in late May, early June. Once they had approval, the FDA then turned over to the DEA and gave the DEA 90 days to reschedule CBD, to remove CBD from Schedule 1. Well, today, the DEA did that. They actually removed CBD from Schedule 1. However, they did it very, very narrowly. So what the DEA's memo on the topic, what it specifically says is that only CBD drugs that have been approved by the FDA are actually not removed from the schedule, but moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 5, which Schedule 5 is the lowest schedule, which I mean, my personal opinion, it's still too much of a schedule for CBD based on the abuse potential. Other drugs that are on Schedule 5 are things like cough syrup with codeine, which does have an abuse potential. I mean, people have been known to buy cough syrup with codeine and abuse it. With CBD, we don't see a potential for abuse at all, so it really technically shouldn't be on the schedule anymore. Now, the DEA's reasoning for why it keeps it on the schedule is an old treaty that they believe governs, and that under treaty law, they're required to keep CBD as a derivative of marijuana, which is still a Schedule 1 controlled substance. They still have to keep it as a controlled substance. So that's their reasoning. But they very narrowly only allowed Epidiolex or a generic version of Epidiolex, which brings us to the orphan drug status of Epidiolex. There can't be a generic form of Epidiolex for the next 7 years. So with the orphan drug status that the FDA gave GW Pharmaceuticals, no one else is allowed to produce Epidiolex or a generic version of it for the next 7 years. I know it's a lot. Sorry.
That was great. I know there was kind of like a sequence of events that you had spoken about in your talk at the event, and it kind of came down to. So, what's your opinion of how this is kind of all came down from the sequence of events?
So, the sequence that I usually go through the historical piece. We start with the CSA, which we've talked about. And then we went to the 90s, where the endocannabinoid system was really identified. And with that, then there was some research, although outside of the official channels, into the effects of these cannabinoids, phytocannabinoids, on the endocannabinoid system. Because of that, we started to see things like CBD be recognized as a separate component of the cannabis plant. So you didn't just have THC, which everybody was familiar with, was the active component, the psychoactive component that everybody thought of when they thought of as marijuana. Turns out there are literally hundreds of cannabinoids within the cannabis plant. And that when research was done, they found that CBD had medical benefits and could be actually, I guess, separated off from the psychoactive elements of the plant, and you could still get the medical benefits from it. Now, I'm not a scientist or a doctor, so all of that is just based on the historical side, what everyone is saying about the benefits of CBD. From the legal standpoint, then we have this desire to get this chemical, this cannabinoid, out to people in order for them to be able to benefit from it. Well, we put it out there in a food supplement. We'd like to think it was a food supplement. However, the FDA still maintains that because GW Pharmaceutical initiated an IND, which is an investigation into a new drug, as soon as they did that, CBD as a single component extract became a drug and is now controlled as a drug under the FDA's rules. So that happened. Concurrently, we had the issues with importing hemp under the CSA exclusion, and attempts by tribes within the United States to grow hemp to be able to then export from the reservation the CSA excluded parts of the plant. And that was stopped because the federal government said you can't have the CSA excluded part of the plant without having the scheduled or controlled part of the plant. So that didn't work. So that's what brought us all the way up to 2014 with the Farm Act. After the Farm Act, we had the Congress actually put out in the continuing budget, and I think this is probably the what I call the punchline of CBD right now, but the continuing budget or continuing appropriations act, and within that continuing appropriations act, Congress protected the transportation, processing, sale, and consumption of any products that were produced within the industrial hemp pilot programs, either within the state where the industrial hemp pilot program is or within any other state. So what is keeping the DEA and the FDA from acting on their opinion that DEA that it's a controlled substance and FDA that it's a drug is this Continuing Appropriations Act, which prohibits those agencies from using federal funds to interfere with products that are produced under those industrial hemp pilot programs. So that kind of brings us, from the beginning in '71 to where we are right now today, and up to speed with the DEA's decision to reschedule Epidiolex to Schedule 5, which will really have no real impact on the CBD industry today. Down the road, it might, but as of today, that nothing is going to change.
So my understanding that is when you're saying that it's a CBD isolate. Now we have full spectrum, we have water soluble, we have liposomal type products that are out there. Are those legally? How are those considered under the Epidiolex? Because they're not necessarily, like full spectrum's not a isolate. So how is the legal issues around that?
So this is going to bring us to a similar discussion about the difference between marijuana and hemp, which is purely a legal fiction, right? It's the same plant. It's Cannabis sativa L. The difference is that someone has specifically picked genetic strains of the plant to have a lower level of THC, but everywhere else genetically that plant is identical to the marijuana plant that is on Schedule 1 and is not hemp. So when we're talking about Epidiolex as an isolate, or Epidiolex, the isolate of CBD, that is definitely going to be a drug. But you could arguably, and I think with some high chance of winning in a court, be able to argue that a full spectrum hemp oil is not CBD isolate and is therefore not a drug under Epidiolex, is not Epidiolex. So it would be a separate thing altogether. And that might win. It hasn't been tested, however. So we're still in a gray area where full spectrum or water soluble or any of those other terms that we use for a CBD it's definitely a gray area. It's lower level of risk, but it's going to have to be tested or legislated.
Okay, so hold on, because we have CBD from the hops plant. You can extract CBD from the hops plant. You can extract CBD from other sources as well. So what if it gets extracted from hops and it doesn't even come from the marijuana plant? So if you're isolating it, at the end of the day, in my opinion, if I was to isolate a vitamin C out of an orange or a lemon, it's still vitamin C at the end of the day. Depending if we know where we're extracting it from. And so how does that, from a legality standpoint, how do they, because from a medical standpoint, we can't test what source it came from. If it came from marijuana, if it came from hemp, if it came from hops, we can't medically know where it was sourced from.
And it's a really good point. I think we both saw this last weekend in Anaheim. We saw a CBD extract that was supposed to come from a combination of lichen and oranges, I think was their source. Mm-hmm. And if that's possible to get the same structure right now under the law, it's even more of a gray area because there's nothing in the CSA that would say specifically that CBD is a controlled substance. What it says is marijuana is a controlled substance, and the DEA has taken that to mean that any extract from marijuana would be a controlled substance. However, if the extract is not from marijuana and it's from some other plant and you're getting the same chemical compound out of that, then arguably that's not a controlled substance. Again, it would take a test in either a court where the DEA has tried to do an enforcement action, or it would take some sort of legislative initiative. When it can't, the example I would give you is synthetic THC, and synthetic THC is separately scheduled now because of that. Because what they were able to do was synthesize THC in the lab or some similar form of it, and then when that was then put out, it had such a bad effect and was so uncontrollable and so unknowable that they immediately moved it onto the schedule. So THC in its synthetic form is a separately scheduled substance.
Interesting, because I believe that drug is actually called Marinol, and I know a lot of physicians hate it. The physicians that I have talked to just dislike it, but I believe that that's the synthetic form of THC from a clinical standpoint.
Right.
Ideally,
and that's well, and Marinol is an actual approved drug from the FDA. The synthetic form that was put on the schedule that everybody's afraid of was what was being added to what they call bath salts and all of that. That was the fear. The Marinol that's out there is an actual legitimate drug and has legitimate uses and purposes. And so, yeah, physicians that are afraid of it are probably afraid of it not because of what it actually is capable of doing, but because it is associated with marijuana.
Mm, mm. What do you think the future legal landscape ideally should look like?
So what it should look like?
Yeah, what it should look like.
What it should look like is, the Congress will pass the industrial hemp, or the 2018 Farm Act that will remove industrial hemp completely from the CSA, and hopefully that will allow this narrow thing of CBD extracts will continue to exist over in the FDA's world, or CBD isolate as a drug over in the FDA's world. But a full spectrum or a oil that's brought from that full plant, the entire hemp plant, could be sold as a food supplement, and that we get some sort of FDA oversight on that. Because as much as we are saying through this conversation that the FDA has been a problem, I think we all appreciate what the FDA does for us, which is, we aren't afraid to go to the store and buy food and eat it. We aren't afraid when we take aspirin that it's going to kill us, because the FDA does have oversight over those things. So right now, there isn't a whole lot of oversight over the CBD products that are out there. And there does need to be some sort of controls so that we are protected as consumers. So that food supplement version of CBD, or high CBD concentrate full spectrum hemp oil, is allowed to go forward as a food supplement. On the other side, on the marijuana side, I kind of like the individual state by state. Let's use the states as the laboratory approach that we're doing, where each state is kind of coming up with their own legal schema for medical marijuana, and shortly thereafter, usually adult use marijuana, and allowing the states to decide. And that at some point when we hit that critical mass, that then gets adopted at the federal level. And what we'll see, again, you're asking me what I think it should look like. It would be regulated under something closer to the ATF, so under alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and taken out from underneath the FDA completely, so that it's treated much more like alcohol and tobacco, and where we acknowledge that it isn't a perfect thing, and it's not something that we necessarily aspire to use, but that it's something that as a society we've all agreed is out there and people can use recreationally if they so choose.
So that comes from a clinical standpoint. I kind of want to stress that there is some benefits with THC, and if we can actually put THC, a percentage of THC, there's a lot of medical benefits that help CBD. And currently, when we say, people are saying it's legal in all 50 states, specifically, I want you to clarify with me that they're they're speaking about a isolate or a full spectrum that's less than 0.3%, and it doesn't have any THC. But from a medical standpoint, I would like to see a little bit of THC, that we could put a ratio in some of these tinctures, because I believe that people would see a lot of benefit with adding a little bit of THC, not to get them high, but just to give them that extra boost in their system to help activate and help rebalance. And that's what ideally this plant does. So how do you feel about, the regulation of THC in some of these tinctures? And I think you kind of already explained that, because you're saying state by state, but I want you to clarify if you were just meaning that with CBD as a whole, or if that was with CBD and THC.
Yeah, so what I was speaking more to was CBD. I think we'll see as a food supplement. That full spectrum hemp oil, that is, it could have up to 0.3 THC in it, but not a 20-to-1 ratio that I think is what most people would look for in a medical marijuana standpoint. So once we go out of the CBD argument or the CBD discussion, which again I think will be soon under the food supplement regime, then we get to the medical marijuana side, and absolutely I agree with you that needs to be looked at and studied. I don't know that we will see medical marijuana move into the food supplement, just because THC does have a psychoactive effect. I think that's not where we'd want to see it go. I think we'd want it to move more towards, we recognize it has a medical benefit, but we're going to put it in this category with liquor and tobacco, so that that there is a government agency that's over the top of it, but that it isn't being controlled like a straight drug. But concurrently, I think we're going to see pharmaceutical companies recognize the fact that if they can get a investigation for a new drug through on a 20-to-1 ratio medical marijuana based compound, that would be marketable. Because at the end of the day, I think are all going to be much more comfortable going to our doctor, getting a prescription for a drug that we know is exactly what it says it is on the outside of the package, and is to treat our own to treat the symptoms that we have. You can make, for instance, you can make your own insulin in your kitchen, or not insulin, but antibiotics. You could make your own antibiotics in your kitchen, but I don't think that any of us want to use homemade antibiotics if we have an actual infection. So when it comes right down to a medical use, we'd want to know the dosing and have consistent dosing, so that we're not seeing huge fluctuations in the impact that we're having in when we're taking it. We don't want to go buy the same bottle and end up with completely different results every time we buy that bottle.
So you're in Seattle, you live in Seattle, and there is dispensaries that have been opened. How do you feel that has been regulated and introduced into the Washington market?
So when we had medical marijuana for a few years before we ended up with what they called recreational, and now what we all call adult use marijuana. When the adult use marijuana was passed and legalized within Washington, the medical kind of fell by the wayside, and a lot of the patients were left without a source of a good, what they feel is a good source of medical product, because the medical marijuana is controlled by our Department of Health, and the medical marijuana producers and processors have to go through much more testing and much more strict product guidelines, which means that at the end of the day, the product that's on the shelf, if it's medical marijuana and has the medical marijuana stamp, is going to be significantly more expensive than the adult use product that's sitting right next to it that says it's the same thing. There are a few exceptions to that. In order for you to have a really high THC product, it has to be a medical product. But the trouble to produce that product has left a lot of producers and processors from doing it. So there is definitely some in Washington. There's some pushback from the medical user community that is saying, hey, look, the current rules are prohibiting or precluding us from being able to get the products that we need. So a couple of things are going forward right now, one of which is Washington is looking for the first time at home delivery, because some of the local jurisdictions have outlawed a retail outlet within their city or their county. So you can't, if you were a medical patient, you wouldn't be able to find the product within your geographical area. Washington's a fairly large state, so you might have to drive an hour or two to find a retail outlet. So rather than have that go forward and preclude those patients that live in those outlying areas, we are looking at home delivery. They're also looking at actually making the processing of the adult use product up to the same standards as the medical product, because right now Washington is the only state that's not required to test for pesticides. That's one of the big issues, is testing for pesticides. So by bringing all the testing standards to the same level, then it won't, making a medical product won't be financially impossible, or it won't be competitive. It will be competitive again once more with the adult use products. There is a small little bump on the medical side, that you don't have to pay the sales tax, but you still have to pay the excise tax, and the excise tax is 37%. So if there's a big push to get the medical product so that you don't have to pay the excise tax on the medical product, which would again make it very competitive with the adult use products.
I know in some states they have where you can, if you grow it, you can't be a distributor or a retailer of it. And I believe that's the case in Washington. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we call that vertical integration. So Colorado and Oregon have what's called vertical integration. Washington, very specifically because of the lessons we learned with alcohol, went away from even a distributor or a wholesale market. So you have producers and processors, and you can be both a producer and a processor. Producers are the growers, processors are those that take the raw materials and process them and package them, and then sell them to retail outlets. And then that third tier is the retail outlets. And though you can't be a producer processor and a retailer, the retailers have to be completely separate and have no affiliation. And it's a violation even for there to be an apparent influence between a retailer and a producer processor.
Now, again, I'm going to ask your opinion on this specifically. Do you think that should be there, or the states that you can go from seed to shelf, or do you think there needs to be a separation?
From a small business perspective, I think that the prohibition on vertical integration is a good thing. I think that protects, if what we're really trying to do with this laboratory of the states is keep big pharma out of it and allow small mom and pop kind of businesses to kind of grow up within the space, the prohibition on vertical integration is a good idea. That it prevents any one entity from becoming too big, and also encourages each of the retailers to look to all of the producers and processors that are available out there for their product. Where you have vertical integration, if all you are is a producer or a processor, you will have a hard time finding a shelf to put your product on in states that allow vertical integration, because they're going to sell their product. And why would they go outside their own stream and spend more money to buy a product from another producer processor when they can produce it themselves?
I think you have, personally, you have an interest, and you are a vegan. Is that, from my understanding, is, and I kind of want to switch gears just a little bit of how you became a vegan.
So back in high school, I was pretty serious about the environment, and it happened in my senior year of high school that the topic for our debate team was what we called back then global warming. And this is 1989. And in that year of spending pretty much every waking day, hour, minute, studying those topics so that we could adequately debate them in forensic debate competitions within the state, I became very familiar with the impact that animal agriculture had on the planet. We had, one line of reasoning that just purely the methane gas produced by cows would eventually cause enough increase in temperature to increase the sea levels to the point where, we would lose all of Florida. Um, because of that, I became a vegetarian right out of high school. And, it's never a strict religious kind of thing, but it was always an aspirational goal. Once I moved to Seattle, I bought into the argument that salmon was a sustainable fish. It took me about 2 or 3 years to learn that was not true, and that was a marketing gimmick that everybody was saying. And the reality is that salmon is not a sustainable fish. And that brought me to a love of our local marine biology here, specifically the orcas, the killer whales that we have here in the Puget Sound, that are a unique species that only eat salmon. So when I found that out, and I found that we were competing now with one of the most majestic species that we have in our environment, I realized that being a pescatarian at that point wasn't going to work for me either, and gave up on that and all other animal products. So our family, my daughter, and everybody else in the family has, for the most part, given up on any animal products. But that's because over time, realized that those impacts on the environment aren't just, large concentrated animal feedlots or methane gas produced by cows, but it's also fish farms. It's also the effluent that's washed off when you have, washed downstream just from the normal day-to-day animal feedlots, or when you have a hurricane like Florence come into North Carolina and you have more raw sewage in North Carolina from the pigs than you had produced by all the humans on the East Coast, just washed out into the Atlantic Ocean because of those hurricanes. So there's impacts that are wide ranging, and of course then there's the health impact part. I'm 47 years old. I'm not getting any younger, and I can tell you that compared to the 47-year-olds that I know, I'm in pretty good shape. I can still go run 5K and ride my bike to work and do it without suffering too much.
Is this the basis of this? Is what led you? Because the reason I'm asking that, or asked that earlier, because I believe this kind of led you to being a cannabis attorney. Because I think it fed into how did cannabis come into play for you?
Well, to my background as a 28-year veteran out of the military, and the last 8 years of that being a JAG, it is somewhat ironic that I ended up in the cannabis field. The truth is that a friend of mine happened to be one of the first cannabis attorneys in the state of Washington, and he had a firm, and he was looking for a litigator. I never expected that I would be involved in this. It was something that, as from my childhood, I steered away from. I didn't drink, didn't use drugs, didn't even drink coffee until I was probably 20 years old. So I stayed away from all of that, despite the fact that wasn't for any religious or any other reason. I just didn't see it as a good idea. But yeah, I fundamentally, if there's a way to cure something or a way to treat something that is plant-based, I'm going to be much more in support of that than I am in some sort of animal tested, laboratory tested product that has, gone through years and years and years of needless testing on animals in order to come up with some sort of an answer to treat a symptom. If the endocannabinoid system is all that everyone says, and that if CBD is doing all the things that CBD is purported to do, and it's actually bringing our endocannabinoid system into into stability and back into its normal status quo, then that's better than treating symptoms. Because that sounds to me more like what we're doing is trying to rebalance our body rather than treat the symptoms and not the causes.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. What about companies that are just going in or wanting to become and ride the wave with CBD? What's your advice to them?
Well, my advice to them is that all startups are high risk businesses. You know, like starting up a business anywhere is going to be high risk. But this particular industry comes with its own risks that are fairly fairly legitimate, I guess, is the way to say that. You know, you do have the DEA, you do have the FDA, you do have a large group in our population that is very averse to the idea of the devil's lettuce, as they call it, um, with marijuana, or with the you know the negative implications that are there with marijuana. So yeah, I mean, if you want to come in and try to make a quick buck, I would advise you against it, because there are other industries you could go into that are possible to do that without exposing yourself to that kind of risk. You could risk your capital, you could risk your other businesses. Right now, we have people who are coming from Canada, where Canada has now made recreational or adult use marijuana legal, and people that work for the companies that are making that happen, that are selling those products, are now being permanently banned at the border. So there are going to be secondary and tertiary risks around this. I have clients that have lost all of their bank accounts. I have clients whose spouses who worked at banks lost their jobs because of their affiliation with the industry. So there are risks beyond just the FDA and DEA that should be looked at if you want to come into the space.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think there's so many people that are just wanting to actually get into the space because they're hearing that it's the next gold rush, it's the next medical revolution, and then you have a lot of people that are out there that are just that are marijuana users, that are supportive of it, and that are on the streets and just supportive of it, and from my perspective, we need to make sure that it's coming from a medical standpoint, a medical, that there is some type of regulations, that there is some type of oversights, and people actually can get the product that is best benefit them, with speaking with somebody that actually is knowledgeable inside the plant and has studied actually the plant. So that's kind of my insight into that. Is there anything else legally that you would advise anyone? So we'll wrap this up.
Just keep your eyes open, keep your ears open for the changes that are coming from Congress. There's other legislation that's out there that if we see a shift in in Congress after this next election, you could see some of these other legislation pieces go through that might legislatively deregulate marijuana. I mean, we might see that happen. I know that there's a marijuana banking act that's out there that would fix the issue that we have right now with the banks, where banks can shut down your accounts if they find out that you're in the business. So that would be a good thing, because right now a lot of the issues we have within the regulated marijuana market is that it's an all cash business, and so you end up with large sums of cash that you can't put into a bank, and then you can't pay your employees with a check because you can't get in a checking account. So support those legislations that are out there. Those kinds of secondary businesses outside of the mainline business in the industry are still very important and need to be supported. That needs to be fixed so that everybody can go and do business as normal business is done, and we're not trying to do everything in this kind of pseudo gray black market anymore.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up with the banking industry, because I totally forgot about that, and that's a really good point, because I think so many businesses are actually struggling, and the industry as a whole is struggling, because we can't put the money in the banks, which is doing our society injustice, in my opinion. So, well, appreciate your time, and thank you very much. And thank you for watching Legends Health, Wellness, and Performance Podcast. And make sure you like us on social media at legends_health. We are on Instagram and Facebook. And the podcast is on iTunes Podcast. So thanks for watching, and thanks for listening, and see you next week. Thanks. Bye.